Welcome to the live debate. IntelligenceSquared.com.
Hi, everybody. Gosh, that was a brilliant speech by David Willetts. I read The Pinch and was enormously impressed by it, despite his schizophrenic attitude to being both Higher Education Minister and the author of The Pinch. You know, the book is brilliant. Wonderful, perspicacious analysis, really quite groundbreaking, actually, and completely wrong. And to illustrate why it's wrong, I'd like to talk to you today about some years ago in China, and this is actually particularly relevant because only today, David was saying in the green room that he's recently met with the Chinese education minister. So cast your minds back. The year is 25 AD, and your name is Emperor Guangwu. And in common with most Chinese emperors, you have a problem, namely that the relatives are always after the throne. So you need to think quickly. You can't surround yourself with them. They'll almost certainly poison your gin and tonic. So you need to find some different advisors and confidants to fill up the royal household. And ladies and gentlemen, if you are Emperor Guangwu, you choose people who have no dynastic claims to the throne, who can have no interest in endangering your life. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a smashing idea and you choose eunuchs. You surround yourself with them and put them in charge of the exchequer, of defense, yes, even the 25 AD equivalent of the Big Society program, safe in the knowledge that all family connections for them have been severed, quite literally. And all is well in the Han Dynasty, but wait, there is a problem. Skip ahead a few years, and what you find is that the eunuchs have run amok, because as Emperor Guangwu and his descendant Emperor Ling discovered, eunuchs in first century China are even more dangerous than imperial in-laws, because they want to spend your money now, use the power now, stop at nothing, engage in every pretty innocent excess. And before they knew it, the second Han Dynasty was besieged by civil war, by the way of the celestial master, a Taoist cult, by an empire plunged into chaos. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we the opposition are that celestial masters now, and by extension, the proposers of this ludicrous motion are the eunuchs. Miss Penny is perhaps an agent of destruction connected to the eunuchs, but we won't go into that in too much detail. Our side will argue quite simply that what has been perpetrated by the opposition is nothing short of a confidence trick, that they seek to start a generational war, to pitch young against old, and worst of all, crucially, to deflect attention from the people who are really responsible for the state of our nation. I refer, of course, to the administrators, past and present, of Her Majesty's government, who have no better prepared this nation's young people for the future or handled our public finances than the eunuchs of old China did. My case is simple. Whether it be PFI debt, unfunded pension liabilities, the failure to build sufficient housing, the refusal to fully fund university education, the determination that no special attention should be paid to the fact that British companies don't invest in young workers anymore, the national debt, the squandering of right-to-buy revenues from the sale of council housing, the squandering of revenues from the sale of public utilities, and the vast, sprawling splurges of oil and gas revenues over decades on tax breaks. Successive governments since Thatcher have ignored the long-term consequences of their actions. The baby boomers, unaware of what has been happening, have been forced to stand by while all this outrageous profligacy has taken place. Well, now Britain's younger generations are learning what the consequences of all this are. I submit that to prove their argument, the proposition must make the case that these baby boomers all knew what was happening, that they wished harm upon their children, that they were agents of a crime, and we all know that's clearly rubbish. There was no premeditation, there was no sinister intention by this cohort, no craven intention. Instead, there was craven intention instead by their leaders. The baby boomers individually have perhaps done more than any other generation for their children. It is no wonder that the Higher Education Minister's party received such a poll bump when George Osborne suggested that inheritance tax thresholds should be raised. The boomers are obsessed with passing on wealth. They didn't steal the family silver. Instead, a number of them received stolen goods, and the goods were stolen by the very governments themselves. And the reason it happened is very simple. Politicians have spent 30 years deploying the logic of the free market to democratic politics, the fatal logic that says people always know what they want even when they don't have to have complete information or unlimited cognitive abilities. And it's the mechanism of choice for deciding how to fund everything from public housing to treating cancer. Politicians should have inspired us, they should have led us, but instead they chose to follow, to triangulate, in the language of Clinton's pollster Dick Morris, to appeal to our basest, craven instincts. And as a result, 3 million young people are delaying starting families in Britain today because housing is too expensive. 1 million under 25 are out of work. A third under 30 live with their parents, and Britain has unfunded liabilities that run into trillions. These aren't individual failings by the boomers, they are collective failings by politicians. For the first time, we survey the possibility that a future generation will be less well off than its parents. And who, apart from the young, will suffer because of that burden? Their parents, the baby boomers. Dave Willetts is quite right that there is a contract between generations. I believe that individuals have succeeded in maintaining that contract. It's politicians who broke it. So the question is, well, how do we fix this? And there are a number of very difficult decisions we're going to have in coming years. And just like on all the big issues of the day, our main political parties agree that there's one which is absolutely fundamental, that the only way to grow our economy in this era of globalization is to skill up the population, to extend the franchise of education wider and deeper than ever before. But even this is not an issue upon which this government or the last one, is brave enough to make the case for funding publicly. And the result is that the next generation of workers in Britain will be besieged both by private and public debt, with effects on discretionary spending and with huge effects on the tax burden that they will be forced to pay. And the point here is very simple, ladies and gentlemen. It's that we're not in an Amazonian society, as David Willetts suggested, but in first century China. Our politicians are the eunuchs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed. I think, Laurie, I'm going to ask you whether you'd like to challenge his thesis about China.
No, I think I'll save that.
David, do you see any flaws in this argument?
Well, it's always very seductive to say, when faced with any problem, I blame the government or I blame the politicians. And you could apply that in every circumstance. But when Ed said that politicians, at one point he said politicians had followed, and my view is that the kind of political pressures well, I'd be interested to hear from Ed what he thought politicians were following. I think what we were following was an appetite for certain sorts of policies that make sense if you think of them in demographic terms. What were we following?
What were you following? Well, what a good question. And how poorly placed I am to answer it by comparison to you. But actually very simple.
You're such a charmer, Ed. You're such a charmer. You should try politics yourself.
Yeah, maybe not. Very straightforwardly, actually, I think that there was a paradigm shift in politics which occurred in the late 1970s, and which emerges from a lot of the kind of Friedmanite thinking around neoliberalism, and which believes that democratic politics should be run in a way which is efficient and successful for private businesses. And this catches on in a very, very big way. It finds its ultimate expression, actually, in the 1997 Labour manifesto, when you probably all remember those pledge cards that Labour gave out with 5 pledges that were all completely unrelated to one another. You know, cutting class sizes by a couple for 12 to 14-year-olds and reducing a certain number of beds and a series of other completely unrelated, utterly farcical ideas that made it very clear to anybody who was looking very carefully that these guys had no idea what they were going to do about education and no idea what they were going to do about health. Although they did have one idea, which was, broadly speaking, to follow much of the same management obsessions that the previous Conservative government had done. Lots of the understanding was related to Friedman and sort of inherited. Buchanan's public choice theory informs a lot of it. And I think politicians have become utterly obsessed in recent years by these very short-term ways of appealing to voters. And I think it's catastrophic for long-term policy making.
I don't think anyone could accuse the current government of appealing shamelessly to voters with their current policies. But there we are. Come and sit down.